They changed my father's will, so I changed the rules. Welcome to a fine revenge, stories of betrayal, payback, and the price of loyalty. Here, every choice has a cost. Subscribe for more. I used to believe every family conflict could be softened by a shared table. In our house, we ate on linen that had seen more negotiations than most boardrooms. My father said warmth was a tool, keep the food hot, keep the room cool, and people would say yes just to be done with it. When he died, the air in our hotels kept that same practice chill, but there was no warmth to balance it. It was like the thermostat had learned grief. The morning after the funeral, my Aunt Celia called. Her voice was clear, brisk, and helpful, the voice she used on vendors and judges. "The will is ready," she said, as if we'd been waiting for a delivery. 2 o'clock. Father's office. She always called him father, never your father, like bloodlines could be tidied by diction. Grant drove. He prefers to be busy, it turns worry into errands. We didn't speak on the way, just listened to the navigation propose routes to a building we could find blindfolded. The lobby smell, polish, coffee, old carpet, met us like a familiar lie. The lawyer was already seated in Father's leather chair, a detail I tried not to notice. It was shorter than I expected. Control of Caldwell hospitality, our chain of polished banquet halls that had accreted into a modest hotel group, went to a family trust. Celia was named trustee. Voting rights lived there, coiled and quiet. Non-voting shares were dispersed to charity vehicles Father liked to mention at Christmas. Income rights, the right to be paid while someone else drove, were split between my mother, my brother, and me. Grant asked the dignified question about stability. Celia answered with the dignified phrase, continuity of stewardship, and put a hand on my shoulder like a counselor. Mother stared at the window blinds as if they might open into a different version of the afternoon. Afterward, I wanted the smallest ballroom, the one we'd always kept a little too cold, because cold made people say yes to upgrades. The chandeliers hummed softly. The ducks whispered the way they do when the building's bones are tired. Father's photograph in the corridor showed him younger, sleeves rolled to the elbow, polishing a brass rail that never stayed polished for more than a day. Under the frame, in his looping hand on a brass plaque, "Keep it in the family." I stood there a long time asking myself which family he meant. That night at Riverside, our oldest property, I took the service stairs down to the boiler room. The concrete sweated in the corners. The heart of the building thudded like a tired animal. Alonzo, our engineer, looked up from a clipboard. "Thought you'd be home," he said. "Thought I was too," I answered and stared at the maintenance calendar taped to the wall. A few boxes were ticked, a few were circled, and some had little arrows pointing into the next month like obligations trying to escape themselves. I heard Father's voice say, "Cold rooms make people agree faster." The room wasn't cold, it was honest. I felt the first lean of a thought I didn't yet have the courage to name. Celia's transition looked like a seminar on control. The emails had headings, the meetings had agendas, and the agendas had action items nobody could quite finish. She said we were aligning process with risk. Vendors were reviewed. Contracts were harmonized. The operations budget learned the phrase temporary reallocation. I kept a notebook of new words that meant no. Grant loved it. Committees suit men who trust chairs more than floors. He started wearing a different watch depending on the meeting's tone. Steel for bankers, leather for staff, black for press. He invited me to a strategy offsite that smelled like new markers and old muffins. I declined and took the night shift at Grandview instead, where the carpet swallows shoes and voices, and the front desk hums like a well-fed refrigerator. 2 months after the will, Mother slid an envelope across our kitchen counter without ceremony. She'd made eggs she didn't eat. "He wrote this before surgery," she said, eyes on the pan as if it might confess something. "He asked me to give it to you if you felt pushed out." The letter was 1 page of my father's hand, blunt and careful. "If the trust feels like a wall, look at the hinges." Below, for items, bank covenants, supplier terms, key staff contracts, municipal licenses tied to named officers. He was telling me where control lives after the speech's end. Not in mottos. in signatures. I read it 3 times and then once more aloud. The words had a hardware store solidity that most legacies don't. Hinges. Not a battering ram. Not a hole in the wall. Hinges. Back at Riverside, I asked Alonzo for copies of the service logs, the real ones, not the summaries that become slides. He handed me a thumb drive like contraband. They've been spreading maintenance thin, he said. Not skipping exactly. Just redefining done. We're holding filters overdue and calling it efficient. I compared the logs to the loan documents in our shared drive. The bank covenant on page 12 was bony and patient. Borrower shall keep all material property in good working order per manufacturer's recommended intervals. Repeated failure constitutes technical default. The words technical default have no heat and all the teeth. You can please a bank by paying it. You can worry a bank by reminding it you know how the manual reads. I thought about bringing it to Celia the honest way. She would have thanked me. She would have convened a working group. We would have produced a report that achieved nothing in 6 tidy pages. I thought about going straight to the bank and letting a stranger swing the hammer. That would cure nothing, only punish everyone who wore our little brass name tags. Father hadn't told me to break anything. He'd told me to find the hinges. That night I drove out past the ring road to a diner that had never learned the difference between coffee and brown water. Matt from Horizon Stone came in wearing a jacket that looked expensive until you noticed he didn't mind if it smelled like fryer oil. We'd gone to school together before he'd learned to love other people's leverage. I'm not here to sell the company, I said. Good, he said. I'm not here to buy it. I'm here to buy something that lets me talk to someone who can. I put the maintenance logs and the covenant language on the table between the ketchup and the sugar packets. A hinge glinted. He saw it and smiled like men do when they find a key under a mat that was always there. Ev, he said, still using the name from when we were boys, you don't need a war. You need leverage shaped like concern. I went home and slept for the first time since the funeral, but it wasn't a gentle sleep. It sounded like ducks chewing on cold air. A week later, the first draft of Guilt arrived as an email from the bank's relationship manager. Hope all is well. We'd like to schedule a facilities review. Celia copied me on her polite reply, calling it a routine touch base. Grant called me 5 minutes later. What did you do? He asked. Read the manual, I said. He sighed. Celia's going to spin this as proactive governance. Don't embarrass her. I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. Good, he said, then stop helping. I didn't. Instead, I started meeting people for coffee. Housekeepers, vendors, the night manager at Grandview, who kept a bottle of aspirin in her apron pocket. Everyone had a story that sounded small, a deferred order, a half-filled shift, a maintenance request marked resolved that really meant postponed. Together they made a pattern. Control was being preserved by slowly starving the system that gave it life. It wasn't evil, it was accounting. At home, Mother noticed I was reading loan documents at the dinner table. You sound like him, she said. I'm trying to remember what he meant by family. She reached across and straightened the corner of the page. Your father believed in leverage, not force. If you pull the right lever, everyone thinks they move themselves. I wrote that in my notebook. Leverage, not force. It sounded like mercy until you used it. The banker arrived on a wet Thursday. Celia met him in the boardroom that still smelled faintly of varnish and grief. I stood by the coffee tray, pretending to care about sweeteners. He went over the maintenance shortfall in a voice that could narrate weather reports. We just need assurance the plan is being executed. Celia smiled. Absolutely. Grant is drafting a memo. The banker nodded toward me. Your operations? Yes. You can confirm the schedule? I can, I said, but the schedule doesn't match the invoices. A pause the length of a paper cut. Celia turned to me with the kind of smile that hides knives. Evan's very detail-oriented. That's good, the banker said. Details keep buildings standing. When he left, Celia closed the door. The click echoed. You've made us look careless, she said. We were, I said. You think this buys you respect? No, I said. It buys me a voice. She stared at me for a long moment, then leaned closer. You're playing with something you don't understand. The bank doesn't love you, it loves the numbers you hand it. When those numbers stop smiling, everyone bleeds. I'll take the risk, I said. You already have. That night I walked through Riverside again. The hum of the air handlers sounded different, tense, like the building knew we'd said something irreversible. I ran my fingers over the brass railing Father had polished, and for the first time I noticed the fine scratches that never buffed out. Permanence disguised as shine. Maybe that was what inheritance really was. The following week moved like a rumor, quiet, persistent, impossible to ignore. Celia stopped copying me on certain emails. Grant started asking if I'd taken time to grieve properly. The subtext was tidy, drop it, or you'll make everyone uncomfortable. I pretended not to hear. At night, the city felt smaller. I drove loops around our properties, headlights brushing over the same brick facades Father once called honest architecture. Honest maybe, but not immortal. Each one needed something, new compressors, repointing, a roof patch, and each one was waiting for permission that never came. The silence of deferred work sounds like air humming through vents and people avoiding eye contact. At home, I pinned a single sheet of paper to the kitchen corkboard, hinges. Beneath it, I wrote what Father had listed, bank covenants, supplier terms, key staff contracts, licenses. Then I drew a fifth line and left it blank, as if the story might still invent its own hinge. The blank didn't stay empty for long. Matt from Horizon called. My partners are curious, he said. We've been looking at your debt. Nothing scary, just a liquid funds trying to unload old paper. We could take a slice, quietly. What would that do? Give us a reason to talk to your bank when things wobble. I told him he was reckless. He told me I was underestimating how much banks love polite threats. We met again at the diner, both pretending it was coincidence. He laid out numbers on a napkin, interest rates, repayment schedules, potential triggers. I told him we weren't distressed. He said, distress isn't a number, it's a tone. When he left, he paid for my coffee and said, you don't have to win, Ev. You just have to make everyone else remember you can. The idea scared me because it felt like inheritance, too. Father's version of justice was always practical. Don't ask for fairness, build leverage. I'd grown up hating that logic. Now I was translating it into fluent practice. By the weekend, Horizon had quietly bought a portion of our debt, enough to attend lender calls, but not enough to trigger alarms. Their letter to the bank was a masterclass in calm concern. Minor discrepancies in maintenance records warrant clarification. No accusation, no deadline, just a pebble dropped into water that was already still. I sat in my car outside the Grandview that night, watching guests check in, and felt the ripples start. The board met Monday morning. You could smell the panic under the perfume. Celia's calm cracked around the edges. Grant's voice went brittle. The banker joined by phone, tone neutral but cooler than last week. We appreciate your transparency, he said, but the maintenance covenant requires timely correction. Celia promised compliance. I slid a folder across the table. Here's the actual schedule and cost projection. She didn't touch it. I already have that information. Not this version, I said. This one's real. The banker cleared his throat. We'll need both copies. Celia's eyes found mine. You've made us dependent on outside opinion, she said softly. I've made us accountable, I said. Same thing, she replied. The meeting dissolved into logistics. We'd hire external auditors to verify maintenance work, reallocate capital from deferred projects, and produce weekly progress notes. In theory, a plan to save us. In practice, a leash. When the call ended, Grant looked at me with something close to pity. You've won yourself a mess, he said. Better a mess than a myth, I answered. Outside, winter sunlight turned the parking lot into glass. I stood there too long, coat open, feeling heat rise from asphalt and realizing how much I'd missed it. Inside the building, thermostats clicked higher. Maintenance crews hustled with clipboards. Invoices flowed. The company was breathing again, but through a borrowed mask. That evening, Mother was sitting at the kitchen counter with the ledger open like scripture. You're buying time. she said without looking up. Isn't that what everyone wants? Only until they realize what it costs. I poured her coffee and sat down. He left us a maze, I said. He left you the map, she said. You just didn't like the direction it pointed. I thought about that long after she went to bed. The hum of the fridge matched the low drone of the hotel's ducts in my memory. All of it, just air moving to keep something alive that didn't know how to stop. 3 days later, Celia called an emergency meeting that didn't sound like one. Her emails were still cheerful. The agenda title said opportunity discussion. In our family, danger always dressed well. When I arrived, the conference table was crowded with consultants in neutral suits. They introduced themselves in acronyms. One was a restructuring advisor, another from capital optimization. Horizon's polite pressure had done its work. The bank wanted evidence of forward strategy, and Celia had decided to stage it. She opened the meeting with her practiced warmth. To reassure our partners, we'll consider divesting non-core assets, just the older sites. Evan, perhaps you could outline operational impact. It was a perfect trap. If I objected, I looked sentimental. If I agreed, I helped sell what father built. I took a breath and said, every property has history. The older ones also have loyal staff and local goodwill. If we sell, we don't just lose revenue, we lose reputation. The consultant smiled like a man marking checkboxes. Reputation isn't on the balance sheet. Neither is faith, I said, but banks run on it. Grant cleared his throat. Let's stay pragmatic. Celia's eyes told me to stop, but I kept talking. Fine. Pragmatic. We can sell Grandview and Hillside, 2 profitable sites, but only if Riverside stays. That one stays family. No one spoke. The consultant typed a note. The banker on the speakerphone murmured that the proposal sounded balanced, which meant decided. After the meeting, Celia cornered me in the hall. You bought yourself sentiment points, she said. They'll still sell, but you get to think you saved something. I didn't ask for thanks, I said. Good. You won't get any. That night I stood outside Riverside watching condensation gather on the lobby glass. Inside, staff set tables for a wedding, white linen, brass cutlery, candles lined like soldiers. For a moment I believed the building was breathing easier, unaware it was already listed for someone else's spreadsheet. The sale documents arrived a week later. 2 inches thick, printed on paper heavy enough to muffle doubt. I read every page while the lawyers talked about closing timelines. Each paragraph felt like sand through my fingers. At the signing meeting, the banker smiled for photos. The consultants shook hands as if they'd solved poverty. Celia signed first, then Grant. When the pen reached me, I hesitated just long enough for everyone to notice. Grant whispered, "Don't be dramatic." "I'm being thorough," I said. "Same thing." I signed. My name looked foreign, like something borrowed. That night I stayed late at Riverside. The last guests were gone, chairs stacked, lights dimmed to amber. I sat at the bar where father used to count receipts by hand. The air smelled of polish and memory. I pulled out his letter again, the one about hinges. The paper had softened with handling, the ink faded but still legible. Find the ones they need more than they can admit. I realized I'd already done that. The hinges had turned, the door had opened, and I'd walked through into a room that didn't feel like victory. Mother found me there past midnight. She set down a thermos of tea. "So it's done?" "Mostly. And you kept Riverside?" "For now." She nodded. "Your father would have called that a partial success. He would have called it compromise." "Same thing," she said, echoing Grant, and smiled in a way that didn't reach her eyes. When she left, I poured a small glass of the cheap house whiskey and toasted the empty room. The brass rail caught the light again, scratched and bright. I thought about how many fingerprints live on metal and how quickly they fade. Maybe legacy is just residue we keep polishing because we're afraid of seeing our own reflection underneath. Spring arrived without ceremony. Bare trees, half-melted snow, invoices stacked like the thaw. The audit reports from the maintenance repairs were immaculate. The bank sent a note of appreciation, the sort of compliment that sounds like an alibi. Celia regained her composure, Grant his routines. Outwardly, everything looked healthy again. Inside, I could feel the new math. We had fewer properties, heavier loans, more compliance. The company wasn't collapsing, but it had stopped breathing on its own. I spent mornings at Riverside, pretending to review bookings, watching lights slide across the lobby floor. The smell of polish clung to my hands, even when I wasn't there. Matt from Horizon called. "You're free," he said. "The bank's happy. My firm made a modest profit. You can unwind us." "You talk like it was clean." "It was surgical," he said. "Sometimes surgery looks like mercy." When I hung up, the silence in the office felt like vacuum. I'd done everything Father's note implied. Found the hinges, turned them, opened the door. But on the other side there was no table, no family, just a view of what I'd taken apart. That evening, Celia appeared in the doorway of my office. "The trust will continue," she said. "Your share is secure. You can take a few months off if you like. You don't want me here." She smiled faintly. "I want you to decide if you want to be." After she left, I looked through the window at the sign glowing against the night, Caldwell Hospitality. The letters were intact, but the current felt different, like an old battery powering a new machine. The cost of leverage wasn't money. It was silence, the kind that settles between people who've all technically won. At home, I poured myself tea and opened Father's letter one last time. The folds were soft, the ink nearly gone. I traced the words with a fingertip. "If the trust feels like a wall, find the hinges." He hadn't said what to do after you opened it. Maybe he didn't know either. Summer came late. The banquet season bloomed again. Graduates, weddings, fundraisers, everyone smiling under chandeliers kept just a degree too cold. I walked through Riverside's kitchen before one of the events. The chef was shouting about garnish, the waitstaff adjusting ties. Life pretending at normalcy. Celia joined me near the bar. "You did what you thought was right," she said. "I did what was necessary. Sometimes they're the same. Sometimes they ruin each other." She studied me, and for the first time in months there was no contempt, just exhaustion. "You'll inherit what's left," she said quietly. "Try not to spend it proving a point." When she walked away, I realized I didn't hate her. She just believed a different version of loyalty. We all had. The event began. Music swelled, laughter ricocheted off marble. I stood near the doorway watching the guests raise glasses, feeling the hum of the air conditioning above me. The sound Father loved, the sound of decisions being made. Somewhere in that crowd, someone would promise forever, someone else would calculate profit, and the building would hold them both without judgment. I thought about how every choice I'd made had been a reaction, a correction to someone else's rule. Maybe that was the family curse, believing the rules were ours to change. When the night ended, I stayed behind. The staff folded tablecloths, the chandeliers dimmed one by one. I ran my hand over the brass railing again, the same scratches, the same shine. Outside, dawn was the color of old invoices. I locked up, turned off the lights, and stood for a moment in the dark lobby listening to the quiet pulse of the building. For the first time it felt like it was breathing with me instead of for me. Maybe that was justice. Maybe that was revenge. Or maybe they'd always been the same rule, just written in different handwriting.